I was just reflecting on some memories. In fact, I actually recorded some stuff before I decided to do this, but I had too much background noise and I don't know, I just decided I wanted to do it again. I was just recently talking about, or reflecting upon, I should say, when I was about 16 or 17 years old and I developed a love for poetry. And I talked a little bit about how poetry was used in my life during that time. And I used to sneak away, from time to time. Not often. I was a very good kid. I really was. I was very obedient. But, just like any other kid, they want to get out. They want to see the world. They want to see, what is outside of their, their home space, right? And what's familiar to them. So I get up, I go to school every day. I had a job, I worked, I took care of my mom. I was an overall good kid, very good kid. But sometimes, and I believe it was every first or third Wednesday, I would go to this little Jamaican restaurant about 7, 8 o'clock at night, which wasn't really, that really wasn't, considering where we lived, my commute from school home, my job was close to my school, so it was okay. But after I got off of work, it was a good maybe hour and a half or so. And my mother, just like everybody else's mom during that time, she wasn't with that whole, oh, you just walk up in here whenever you feel like walking up in here. My mother was the type of mother that was waiting at the bus stop. She was waiting at the bus stop, So every first or maybe third Wednesday, I can't remember, but I know it was on Wednesday, I knew that this local Jamaican restaurant was having a poetry slam. And I wasn't old enough to get in. I was a 16, 17-year-old kid, but I always looked older for my age. And so I kind of slipped through the cracks a little bit. They let me in, y'all. They let me in. I told the man, I was like, I forgot my ID. And, he let me in. He says, okay, go ahead. You go ahead. I said, okay. And I just sit in the back because I was just scared to death that somebody was going to catch me and pull me up out of there. I just knew it. But it's because of that place that I developed a love for poetry in motion. I already loved poetry from some of the great poets. Of course, our Maya Angelou, you know what I mean? Like, it was, you get me? Just the vibe of it all. It was about how you expressed yourself. And I found it so fascinating how they would make their voices rise and fall at certain points in their performances. I was very intrigued by that. And I loved that everybody seemed to be so adamant about making the point that they were making. Whether it was anger, whether it was love, whether it was lust, whether it was just having an overall love for humanity, the world in general, Whether it was making music, whether it was just making sounds. I recognized that within that small space that I was connecting to the souls of people that I didn't even know through frequency, through words, some of which I could not even relate to, but they performed it in such a way that it made me want to connect to it. That was the first place I ever had ginger beer also. I didn't know what ginger beer was. One of the people asked me, would you like something? And I was like, well, like I said, I had a job, so I had money in my pocket. And I was like, yeah, I'll take this. I was like, it's not real beer, is it? And the man laughed, and I was like, oh gosh. And in that moment, I knew that he knew that I was not supposed to be there. I knew in that moment that he knew that I was not supposed to be in that place. And he knew I wasn't old enough, but they didn't serve alcohol. So it was okay, And I didn't know that they didn't serve alcohol because that wasn't my vibe. I was a kid. I wasn't really interested in drinking or smoking or any of that. Like I said, I was an overall good kid. But I did have my moments, but it was later on, in my teenagehood or whatever. But during that time, it was like, no, I'm okay. I don't want anything that grown-ups do. I didn't really want to do except for go to the poetry slam. That was it. I needed to get to the poetry slam. And so in that moment, he knew I wasn't supposed to be there, but he kind of smiled a little bit. And he had these long locks, and he was just a beautiful, beautiful black man. Beautiful. And his teeth were just like so white and so straight. And it was just like he had this chocolate skin. It was just like, Lord, have mercy. Have mercy. And he had this beautiful, deep accent. His voice was very bassy. I remember. And I'm just a young lady, and I'm looking up, and I'm like, wow, he is handsome, Just a kid in there with all them grown folks, And I think he knew, and he just kind of smiled at me. And it wasn't a flirtatious smile or anything. It was kind of like, look at this kid in here trying to be grown. It was kind of like it was kind of like that. And I think I was probably the only youngin in there at the time during that season. And I would sit in the corner in the back. It was, very dark. If you've ever been to a poetry slam, you know what I'm talking about. It's not dark and gloomy, but it's dark because you've got to have the spotlight on the poet that's up on the stage. And so I'm sitting in the back, and I'm drinking my little ginger beer. And when I tell you, I said, this must be how people feel when they first go to church. Because I literally felt so connected energetically to the people in that room, especially after they performed their poetry. It was something that I still can't explain it, as you can see. It became something very, very special to me. And so I remember going home, and I remember closing my eyes as a young lady and picturing myself up there. My first role models as a young lady were poets. So I'm not surprised that I would, have a liking of poetry, or that as I'm going through this whole self-discovery or self-development stage with my platform right here, it's like I'm not surprised that poetry is flowing through me at this point, because it's an organic part of who I am. It's a part of my cloth. It's a part of my cloth. And so I have I've taken the time to write out some of my poetry. I have notebooks upon notebooks, but there are only a few that I would care to share. And I also write sensual poetry. And sometimes people think that because I speak about the Most High, they feel like it's a contradiction. They feel like, oh gosh, how could she, you not no child of God and you talking about sex. Like, well, I used to read, what do you call those? Love novels. I found this big plastic bin worth of love novels. It was filled with love novels when I was about 14, maybe. And I've been in love with love ever since. I've been a hopeless romantic ever since. I don't blame my mom. I don't blame my dad. I don't blame anybody. I just blame me walking home from school and finding that huge plastic tub full of love novels. And I used to really love to read back then too. That was my thing. Like I was an avid reader. And if you couldn't find me anywhere else, you could find me at the library. And that's just how I was when I was young. And so I got into it, and I learned about sensual writing, sensual literature. And so I merged my poetry and, what I knew of that sensual literature together. And I have my own style of sensual poetry. So maybe I'll put something out at some point, but for the most part, I don't really care to share it. I don't really care to. It's just something that I like to do. I like to write. I probably would have someone else perform it for me or something like that, but I would probably be way too shy to perform some of my poems that I have that fit that category. But anyway, I spoke about how sometimes when people meet me, they have this look on their faces. It's kind of like, what? It's a little bit confused, like there's something going on with this lady here. Something going on with her. Who is this lady? And I usually look at them and I say, to myself, I'm like, I think they see my poetry. I think they see my poetry. When I get that look from people, I recognize that they see my poetry. And like I said, I went to that little Jamaican restaurant when I was younger, and I would go to the poetry meetings. And from that moment on, I feel like it contributed greatly to my vibe. And they showed me love through their poetry. And like I said, I felt connected to every soul in that room because of it. And for that, I'll be forever grateful, because I never knew that type of vibe even existed until I stepped in that room. So, with that being said, you guys, thank you. Thank you guys for visiting. I am TYLEA B.